Let's move over to Germany. That is, compared to France and England, we don't talk much about Germany in the 19th century. It's late to industrialization and colonization, and German art in the 20th or in the 19th century really it follows the Kaiser, the emperor, who says that art. The function of art is to be uplifting, it's to glorify the nation, and a strict academic style is what's promoted in Germany until we see the first German avant-garde groups form. And the one that we're going to start with is called The Bridge, Die Brücke auf Deutsch. These artists did not go to the academy. They did not go to the National Art School, but instead they went to vocational schools and they used woodcut, a much older pre-modern form of printing. They liked the crudely hacked block. They felt like there was kind of an immediate investment, a kind of unadulterated creative urge that was expressed here. They also were really indebted to Matisse. They actually asked him to join them. They formed a really tight-knit group too. They lived in a commune essentially, and they're kind of like early 20th century hippies, and they sought to completely merge art and life. But they wanted to reject any sort of conformity to conventional life, and so they go and live in a commune in the woods and write a manifesto. This is going to be a common theme in a lot of modern avant-garde groups. They write a statement about what their goals are. This is very, very different than kind of a more kind of organic kind of evolution. They really saw themselves as different. They wanted to promote this new approach, this new method. And we see that their manifesto is a woodblock, a woodcut print that for them is connected to a more spiritual time, pre-modern, non-commercial. And they use the bridge, we can see here, this little bridge symbol, as an idea that man is a bridge and not a goal. This is actually what the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche was a very influential philosopher for the Expressionists, and this idea of man being a bridge and not a goal was really important. To emphasize this idea of process, that the bridge is a point of transition. Now they also painted, and here we see one of the main leaders of the group, a man named Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, his nude bathers under trees. And I mean, again, the influence of Van Gogh, that kind of vibrant color, that those brash, visible brushstrokes, very clear. So the German expressionists, the bridge members, they like to take models out into nature to frolic nude. And we see both men and women together. This is a larger movement in Germany at the time against the kind of strict, uptight Victorian morality that still reigns in Europe. They wanted to cast off all of the trappings, all of the rules about decorum and bourgeois morality. They wanted humans to integrate into nature. They wanted art to be integrated into life. And they really demanded both artistic and sexual freedom. Here in Kirchner's nude under a Japanese umbrella, we see another example, another expression of primitive and the notion of the primitive. We have this garishly colored, bold presentation of the nude. It almost feels a little bit violent the way her body has been portrayed with these kind of crude hackings of pigment. It almost looks like she's lacerated or bruised the brightly painted face. At this time, the only women who wore makeup in Europe were prostitutes. Makeup was not something that an upstanding woman would wear. And furthermore, that parasol, that was also another icon of a prostitute. And so already the social standing of this woman is questionable. And if it doesn't go far enough for us, we see some fairly lewd sexual scenes in the background. We know that in Kirchner's studio out at the nature commune that he had very sexually explicit decorations in his studio. And again, just to kind of tie this back to Matisse, and then if we go further to think about Gauguin's Spirit of the Dead Watching, his riff on Manet's Olympia that he completes in Tahiti, we see this real connection between primitivism and the female nude, and not just a kind of objective presentation of the female body, but an eroticized, exotic female nude. In Kirchner's SelfPortrait, we see these themes further developed. This bright, aggressive color and this wild, almost kind of tribal robe that he wears, these brilliant fabrics. It's really, and I think there's also some key differences here between the study on the right and the final product on the left. Look at what Kirchner has done to the female model who sits behind him. So in the study, she has her feet firmly planted on the ground. She's leaning forward. Now, her feet barely touch the ground. It kind of infantilizes her. It makes her feel a little bit small and vulnerable. He also puts these little kind of baby doll ribbons here on her bloomers, on her underwear, to make her look also more vulnerable, more sexually available. And Kirchner looms in front of her, no longer with the collar and tie, but there's a suggestion here that he's nude under this kind of primitivist robe with paintbrush erect at his groin level. That is also not just a kind of happy accident, but instead we see this woman who looks apprehensively towards Kirchner, who is just completely in charge of this situation. There's an assertion here in Kirchner's self-portrait between the creative freedom of the avant-garde artist and the sexual freedom that he possesses as well. We know from records that two circus performers, African circus performers named Sam and Millie, came to live with the Bridge group. Here's a portrait of Millie and Sam in Kirchner's studio. But what's interesting is we only see Millie in finished works of art. Now, why is that? I think it's for the same reasons I've already outlined. There's an emphasis on the erotic dimensions, the uninhibited sexuality, the exposed genitalia. And this kind of work, this kind of primitivist work, is unthinkable outside the realm of colonialism. Yet it also values sexual liberation and the desire to critique European bourgeois ideology, that same ideology that upholds the value of chauvinism and colonialism. It's complicated. So what happens in this complexity is we see Kirchner and others, they use art to critique the prevailing social order. But through these eroticized, exoticized representations of non-European women, they mirror the very sexist and racist attitudes that they are trying to work against. These notions of non-European cultures being inferior, women being sexually available, and inferior as well. I mentioned that there's different groups in the German Expressionist movement. So I want to move to another group, the Blue Rider, that's centered around the work of Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc. They are more interested in developing non-representational abstraction and using the animal world as a kind of utopian counterworld. They are much less interested in this kind of primitivism that we saw from Kirchner. Kandinsky is a fascinating figure because he is Russian, trained as a lawyer, and he goes through Western Siberia to trace his family roots there. He becomes interested in all of these small cultural groups in Siberia. And then he goes to Munich in 1896 and he sees an exhibit of Monet's haystacks, the series of haystack images that Monet does very late in his life. And he's so moved that he decides he has to become an avant-garde artist, and that's exactly what he does. He starts the Blue Rider group in 1903 and the image of the rider on a horse, he says that's the same as the relationship between the artist and his talent, this kind of cooperative collaboration, and this image of freedom too, right? The kind of, rider in the landscape. We see the kind of colorism here that we've seen in other expressionist work, but again, no elements of primitivism. Here are some examples of Monet's early haystacks from the end of his career that so inspired Kandinsky to become an avant-garde artist. And when we come back in the next video, we'll start with Marc's blue horses. Franz Marc shared these opinions with Kandinsky, and they formed the Blue Rider group together.